Hey everybody, welcome to Chiller Chat. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight we have comic book writer Daniel Doing, and he has a comic book character named the Fringe Knight. Daniel, thank you for joining us. Thanks for coming on the show.
Great to be here.
Now, you're from Western Pennsylvania, and you started writing the Fringe Knight, what, a couple years ago?
Yeah, I started about 2 years ago. Started out writing, getting the concept put together, and then working on the backstory, building up the supporting characters. I really went deep with it, kind of inceptioned everything in my brain.
And you thought of the costume and everything, in fact, I'll show the viewers. This is probably my favorite picture of him. You can see that. And he's kind of like a, well, you can explain the costume, what he has on here, with the overcoat and the symbol. In fact, I see the symbol is the same one you have on your shirt, the Fringe Knight shirt. So tell us a little bit about the Fringe Knight.
Well, the Fringe Knight is a superhero archetype in a sort of sci-fi horror setting. It's set in a kind of similar version of our world, only in this version, everything that we think goes bump in the night actually exists, but it exists under the surface. So they kind of try to coexist with everything. And the way everything coexists together is because long ago the rules were laid out by this secret society, the oldest secret society on the planet, called the Order of Knowledge, which is actually where the symbol on his armor comes from. And the Order's been there for centuries, making sure everything from the, like the Spanish Inquisition didn't happen in America kind of thing. Always been there to kind of make sure humanity didn't shoot itself in the foot, metaphorically speaking. And then about 30 years ago, this event happened that was cataclysmic. It actually reset everything. And the Order as a whole basically sacrificed itself to prevent Armageddon times 1,000. But everything that the Order set up is so well put in place that it just kind of kept running on automatic. That's why everybody thinks that they're still there.
Now this event that occurred, is this going to be touched on in the comic?
Yep, we'll touch on that once we get readers more interested in the character.
We'll get to that down the road then in the comic.
Yeah, it's going to be our Easter egg where everybody's like, well, come on, what happened? Like, yeah, we'll tell you soon enough.
Which leads up to the Fringe Knight.
The Fringe Knight, and in present day, we see a young man named Anthony who works in this pawn shop in Erie, and very bright guy. He would have been
Erie, right here in Pennsylvania.
Yep, Erie, PA.
And what made you think of Erie?
Just I love the fact that there was a city called Erie, and just it seemed like nobody was doing anything with that. You've got this whole city that you could do like this magnificent story in.
Sounds so eerie.
Exactly. Story so eerie you wouldn't believe it. So Anthony ends up dropping out of college because he's taking care of his family. So he ends up working in this pawn shop, kind of not the Ritz, but it's not like a dingy little trap or anything either. And one night while he's working in the shop, he discovers these journals that belong to this archaeologist that just recently passed away. And just through pure happenstance, that's kind of his whole superpower, is just dumb luck. He discovers these messages hidden in the journals that lead him to this area just off the coast of Erie, right near Lake Erie, that he kind of like traipses around a little bit, and he kind of goes like, yeah, I fell for a joke from a dead man, very funny. And as he goes to leave, he just falls into this hole that just seems to appear out of nowhere. And he lands in the secret headquarters of the Order of Knowledge, which, best way to describe it, it's the Bat Cave meets Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory. A lot of really cool kind of postmodern steampunk themes to it. Like very, very nice backdrop to it. And he discovers it's called the Arcanum Laboratorium, and it was the headquarters of the Order of Knowledge. And after discovering this stone that actually had a message on it that transferred itself into his brain, called a memory stone, he discovers through these small snippets that were recorded on it that since he found the Arcanum, he was smart enough, and now he's in charge of it all.
And that's where he finds this symbol here that's on
Yep.
your shirt
Yep.
and on his costume.
Yep.
Okay.
And very shortly thereafter, he meets a very dapperly dressed zombie named Francis, who is actually the sort of the groundskeeper of the Arcanum, if you will. And very, very interesting character, Francis. He's kind of like the anti-Alfred, as I like to put it, because he's got like a very Professor Snape personality, like, oh yeah, you'll do fine with that. There's no way that'll go wrong. So just through a series of mishaps and discovering, he actually discovers like everything that he uses is actually a separate invention that was created by a member of the Order throughout the eons that it's existed.
Okay.
And it started with this gauntlet that had a grappling hook on it, and then he put on the chest plate to make sure like he didn't like destroy his chest or anything while zipping through the air at high speeds. Put on the coat so that way he could protect more of him. Put together the mask and everything. Everything that he uses, it's basically a hand-me-down costume in a sense, that it's all this separate stuff that people created, and he's just like kind of cobbled it together.
And kind of one of the interesting things about that character, and with going with the theme of the show here, Chiller Chat, horror, paranormal, science fiction, is now he fights a lot of monsters.
Oh
This is-
yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, he doesn't fight normal street crime. Well, he does occasionally, but a lot of it like that he fights is like because a lot of the stuff that I kind of applied, because the whole reason he's called the Fringe Knight is because he actually walks that fine line between what is science and what is magic.
Okay.
You know, what is up, what is down, what is left, what is right. Even a lot of the stuff he uses, some of it is scientifically created. Like on his belt buckle, he had the belt buckle itself actually is a device that houses a unstable, newly discovered element that actually, when you put an electrical current through it, lessens his gravitational field. So he can leap higher, he can jump off of tall buildings without, breaking his legs, things like that.
Okay. Well, I wanted to look at this picture too. This one right here. Now, could you explain this one here? Who are these characters?
Oh, those are going to be my first 3 big villains that are going to be introduced through the course of the first 10 issues of the book. The very big guy in the middle there, that's called the Wendigo Man. He's actually my first issue villain.
Okay.
He's a prehistoric radioactive werewolf. Not a very pleasant character to run into.
Well, I would say a werewolf in and of itself would be trouble enough, let alone a radioactive prehistoric one.
Yep.
So how did he come about?
Well, one of the things that I really thought interesting was like things like lycanthropy and vampirism. They've kind of like put a logic to it throughout the years. Just like vampires biting people to turn them into vampires. There's a whole process of exchanging blood and all that, and werewolves biting normal people to turn them into werewolves. So I kind of applied that logic, thinking like, well, if you have a werewolf and it bites somebody, turns them into a werewolf, that's kind of a little bit more diluted than the virus that they have. So I started thinking, well, what if it was like the pure version? Like, what if like thousands of years ago? Like, especially if you look at like cats and dogs nowadays compared to cats and dogs, like thousands, like in the Ice Age even.
Right.
How much of a difference there is. And I was like, it was just kind of like it occurred to me like, oh wow, they would be massive. They'd be absolutely terrifying then. So I, kind of figured like werewolves, like in the Ice Age or even before the Ice Age, if like a Neanderthal or a Homo sapien was turned into a lycanthrope from like the pure source, they probably never turned back. Like they were just like these massive hulking beasts.
A woolly werewolf.
Yep, woolly werewolf. I like that. Yeah. Like in vampires probably were very like Nosferatu looking, bald, long nose, pointed ears, probably bat wings,
More monstrous looking than the
a lot more monstrous looking.
Twilight vampires, I'm sure.
Yeah, we don't mention the Twilight
You don't
vampires.
acknowledge those ones.
They are the unspoken.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Now here's the first issue of the Fringe Knight, and this just came out, correct?
Yep, I actually premiered it back at Erie Comic-Con in September of 2017.
Okay. At the Erie Comic Con. Well, this is And who does your artwork?
My artist for the first issue was a friend of mine, an artist friend of mine named Chris Chance. He's actually from up around the New York border.
Mm-hmm.
And then my artwork for my posters there is actually my new reoccurring artist, whose name is Donnie Nicholson, and he's actually from over in Indonesia.
Okay, I'll show them some of the artwork here. Now you write the stories.
Yep.
Donnie.
He does the illustrations.
And then who does the coloring?
That would be my fiance, Shannon.
Okay.
And then I have a friend of mine, Michael, who does the actual lettering.
It's hard for me to turn it that way. I better. So, they are some of the pages inside the Fringe Knight, and here's your zombie, the zombie caretaker.
Yep, Francis, the anti-Alfred.
Oh, and I opened right to him showing his outfit, his costume, and what everything is. What gave you the idea to do this?
Well, it all started about 2 years ago at Cleveland Comic-Con. I met this gentleman named Ted Sikora, who had published his own comic called Apama, the Undiscovered Animal. And that was actually based in Cleveland, and I thought that was so cool. It really showed that you don't have to be in one of the big publishing companies like Marvel, DC, or even Wildstorm or Image. If you have an idea, pursue it. Find your voice, find your way to show it. And that really spoke to me. And it was actually fun. It was later on that very convention, I actually got to meet Jason David Frank, the original Green Ranger, one of my biggest heroes growing up. And I actually used to cosplay a lot. And I had this Green Lantern battery with me that I always have celebrities sign it. I had him sign it. He was just so impressed with it. And I was just gushing like a teenage girl because of it. And he's like, that's so creative. You should really pursue that. I'm like, I can't do nothing. He's like, you can do anything you set your mind to. And that it kind of clicked in my head. So,
did you know at that time when you were telling him about this, did you have the character in mind yet? Or did you just say, I wanted to do a comic?
I wanted to write a story. I wanted to do my own comic. And as much as I love comics, I wanted to stay away from some of the tropes that you see. I wanted to do solid characters that had solid stories, not do 50 reboots after 2 years of running a series, things like that. I wanted to build a universe. I do not like that. There's too many of them, I think. Yep. It takes away from the continuity, I think. It really does.
I mean, because everything that happened up until that point, when they branch off and do another, I don't know, parallel universe version, it just means it takes away from the
none
meaning
of these stories you
that
read
story
matter
up until that point. So you had the idea that you wanted to do your own comic. Now, how did it get from that to that?
Well, I figured, I wanted to do a character. I didn't want to do somebody necessarily super powered, but maybe augmented through maybe scientific enhancements or magical enhancements. I'm like, well, why not both? Why don't I have a character that walks the fringe of logic and science and magic? And that's actually where it just kind of clicked. I was like, maybe a fringe man? No. That's too 70s. And then it just after evolving after weeks, I finally figured out the name. And as I went with the name, because unfortunately, I can't draw for nothing. I really wish I could. But a 3-year-old has better drawing skills than I do. But the one thing I am good at is actually building, making cosplay. So I just figured, well, I can't draw. Why don't I just make him in real life, and then I'll have it for somebody else to draw. And it just started from there, and I just started with hundreds of different costume pieces that I just had little scraps of this, and I'm like, oh, what if I put this with this? That's not gonna work. Oh, what if I put this with this? Oh, that's a little bit better. And it evolved and evolved, and it started to take on this kind of steampunk look to it, and I was like, that's pretty cool, do a sort of steampunk but in modern day stuff. And it just kind of spiraled from there with the idea for the story and everything. And even the symbol, I didn't really come up with that until I really started to do my research. Because the one thing I definitely do with my stories is I put the research in. I don't just say oh yeah, that's supposed to be that.
What is the significance of the symbol now that you're touching on that?
Well, the symbol is for the Order of Knowledge. I actually looked through the ancient Greek symbology, and I found the symbol for order and the symbol for knowledge, and I actually combined them. So the symbol actually, it literally means order of knowledge.
Huh. Well, that's neat. Wow. And now, I've seen pictures of the Fringe Knight on your Facebook page, and I can't help but notice that you're kind of the same height, you know. I don't want to give away any secrets here, but I kind of think...
I don't know what to tell you, man. There's a lot of people the same height.
But you have, you used to do cosplay, right?
Yeah.
And so that's when you developed your costume. And have you had any other superhero characters that you did when you were cosplaying?
Oh yeah, I did Green Lantern quite a bit. That was like one of my favorite characters to do because like you could literally, Green Lantern, like any of the lanterns, you could literally combine that with anything and you could never go wrong. You could do like a Green Lantern RoboCop if you wanted. Yeah. And it would be so awesome. I also did a Batman, which is another good one. And I also had a Dr. Fate that I did as well, that I was really proud of.
Yeah, I saw that one. It was pretty cool. I saw the Batman one too. What did you make those out of?
I did a silicone cast for the cowl. Actually, I've been experimenting before I got into writing. I actually started trying to make an actual like cape and cowl out of fabric with like foam inserts. So it's actually like in the comics and the cartoons where he could actually pull his hood back and put it back up. Huh. So that way it's a little bit more comic book accurate.
So that was a couple years ago. Do you do that anymore?
Oh yeah, I still do cosplay. But it's mostly at the conventions as Fringe Knight because I'm constantly updating everything, and my artist hates me for it. It's like, why do you update that? Now I've got to draw that different for this issue. Like, sorry.
Speaking of your artist, now you say he's from Indonesia.
Yes.
How do you get you just email the stuff back and forth, or
we email and we
mail
also
it physical?
We do some physical mail for some pages, and when I send him some like ideas and stuff, or whenever I get posters made, I send him stuff. A lot of times we actually, because we share stuff like through email and like Google Docs and stuff like that, it really makes it very, very streamlined. So it's like he's literally right down the road from me.
How far in advance does he have to have what you're writing in order to do the comic book?
Usually I send him the issue and he'll break it down and turn it into the pages, and then he'll be like, okay, what do you think of this layout? I'm like, why don't we reorganize this page for this? I'm like, sure enough. And then usually within a week, maybe 8 days, we'll get the issue laid out in the right panels, and then he'll start thumbnails and then work on sketches and then penciling and then inking. And then as he gets the page to the final point, he'll actually send me the pages as he gets them done. And then I'll hand it off to my wonderful fiance who does the coloring, and then we hand that off to my friend Mike who does the lettering, and then he sends it back to me for final approval and then ready for digital arranging for print.
I just wondered if this was like almost like a movie director. Like when you're writing, do you kind of see how it will look in the comic? Do you send him any sketches like, this is kind of how I see this?
I'll try and do some like crude sketches, and it's like he's like, so is this supposed to be a fist or a thumb? And I'm like, it's a fist. Keeps me on my toes. He tries to encourage me to draw, but then I try and draw, and it's sad face on the page.
Well, how long did it take to come out with your first issue?
It took about a year to get everything organized and to find an artist to actually get the first issue done. A lot of stuff, like, it really picked up like the month before I decided to release it, because like that was the one thing I was like, when do I want to release it? And then I was put in contact with the people from the Erie Comic-Con who were very interested that there was a book based in Erie. So they decided to be like, well, why don't you have a booth here at a premiere? And I'm like, that sounds great. So that actually put a time frame on everything. I'm like, okay, we gotta get going, gotta get this done, gotta get this organized. And as they say, the rest is history. And
you're working on your second issue now, right?
Yep, second issue should be coming out around mid-February.
Okay, all right. Now, about you. Now, obviously, you love comic books. That's evident. I would imagine horror, because you've got monsters included in the storylines. Oh yeah. Magic and things like that. So, I mean, what were some of your inspirations growing up? That led you to to want to write about this stuff now?
A lot of my inspiration came from like the Batman the Animated Series.
Okay.
Loved that. I loved like the Friday the 13th movies. Just I love the stories of like different characters having to fight this almost elemental force of just stomping your face in and just finding ways to defeat that. I love that. And then, I just loved reading like the Lord of the Rings, especially like even before the movies came out. I was a real big fan of Lord of the Rings, and that took a lot of influence on me too. I was like, what if we saw Gandalf just driving up in like an Escalade nowadays? How cool would that be?
Well, what about the as far as horror? You say Friday the 13th, and did you like any of the old, like the Universal or the Hammer or anything like that?
Yep.
So, I would imagine, I'm just taking a stab in the dark here, that you probably enjoy Halloween.
Yep.
You're into the costumes, you like the horror and the so do you do anything special for Halloween?
Oh, between me and my fiance, we make the front yard look like a crime scene.
Oh yeah. You do any like house haunting or anything like that?
No, nothing like that. Unfortunately, my house isn't big enough for that, but we definitely deck out the front yard, and we have a lot of fun. Like whenever there's like, because especially in Meadville, they have the Halloween parade, and we have a lot of fun at that.
Yeah. Well, they had a haunted house there in Meadville up until I think about maybe a couple of years ago. But I went to visit that. It was down in the basement of the building, but that was pretty good. I love going to those.
Yeah.
I love going to those, and so I assumed you would as well, with everything that you're interested in, because a lot of those are similar to the interests I have, obviously.
That was another like the movie The House October Built. I love those movies too.
Oh yeah, now that's the new one on Netflix. Well, I don't know if it's new, but I just saw it recently. So, and then I saw that they had a part 2. So I would imagine they're gonna keep this going for a while.
Oh yeah,
that was a neat idea. The idea of the extreme haunts and then going along and kind of making a journal through video was. It was an interesting idea because I wasn't really sure just how extreme they were going to get, and I won't give it anything away for
spoilers.
Spoilers, yeah. But I could see that being a popular thing to continue.
Definitely.
Now on getting back to the Fringe Knight, who's his first opponent?
The Wendigo Man.
The Wendigo Man. Okay, is that the werewolf that
Yes,
we see? The radioactive prehistoric werewolf?
Yeah, that is Gigantor, as I was first thinking about calling him before I settled on Wendigo Man.
Okay, and the entire battle's in the first issue.
Yep.
So okay,
it's a very, very quick battle, but again, it all goes back to the fact that his only true superpower is dumb luck. Because you've got a kid who's running around in a bunch of antiques that's fighting this gigantic, frothing at the mouth monster, has no idea how to fight, and just literally by the skin of the Wendigo's man teeth does he actually defeat him.
Now that werewolf is different than some of the other werewolves that you've talked to me about. Why aren't the other werewolves like that? This guy, he's just kind of a fluke?
Because a little bit of a spoiler alert. It's when these guys are drilling for oil in the north, they actually discovered the frozen remains of a prehistoric werewolf. And when they're carbon dating them, there's, again, going back to that old classic, there's a lab accident where there's some fragments that were irradiated to try and carbon date them, get shrapneled into one of the scientists, and so he's embedded with this like prehistoric radioactive now werewolf curse. So you've got, it's kind of like Jurassic Park, you get like this prehistoric creature that's now thrust into the modern world. And there's going to be a lot of reverberations for that, especially in the supernatural community.
Yeah. Well, the other werewolves you were explaining were, and this makes sense, you put a lot of thought into this, they're kind of like a pack, kind of like a motorcycle gang would be.
Yeah, I put a lot of thought into if there were like supernatural creatures that existed in the modern world. And like, just like with any society, there are those that are going to be more prone to crime than like normal people. Like, there's like werewolves and vampires that just kind of go about their business. They get like, blood from the blood bank, stuff like that. But the ones that do crime, like, what would they do? And I figured, well, with werewolves being the pack mentality, they probably were more like a biker gang. They wore like their leathers with like their call signs on the back and everything.
That actually makes sense.
And like your werewolves did most of your chop shops or your underground fight clubs and things like that.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking like, well, vampires, they're always very hoity-toity, especially like the older ones that have like that old school Victorian
kind of uppity, yes, sure.
Yeah. So like they did more like your nightclubs and your like drug trafficking and maybe some human trafficking as well.
Okay.
And it's all about how Fringe Knight tackles that, because in their minds they're not committing a crime, they're just existing because vampires need to drink blood, werewolves need to fight. So how do you tackle that? And how do you keep that contained?
Are you going to have anything like UFOs, anything aliens and stuff like that? I would only imagine that you'll get to that eventually.
They don't call him the Fringe Knight for nothing. we're going to see him fighting Mirror Fringe Knight before issue 100.
Oh, geez. Neat idea. You say you've been working on this for about the last 2 years, but I like how you've just developed all the ideas of the magic and the horror and comic book heroes. These are all things that, that caught my eye because I love all that stuff, as well as science fiction and paranormal and horror. So I think I'm going to keep an eye on the Fringe Knight. How can our viewers keep an eye on your Fringe Knight comic book as well?
Well, they can definitely check out the Facebook page.
Okay.
I've got that set up there. So if they're not in the area and they want to get an issue, they can just send me a message, and that way they can get one that way. And if they are in the area, go and check out Books Galore up in Erie or Action Toy Man, and they've always got copies.
Okay, so you can just go in and get it in Erie and go to Facebook and look it up. So is there anything else you'd like to touch on right before we wrap it up?
Like if you'll notice on the back of the book there, it says, "The Order is watching."
The Order is watching. So you make sure that you continue to watch and watch for the Fringe Knight comic book. And Daniel, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Chiller Chat.
It's great to be here.
Well, thank you, and thank you for tuning in. Have a good night.
How many times do I have to tell you, just because something isn't good doesn't mean it's bad?